The ground of Boston's North End did not so much shake as it did groan, a deep, guttural rumble that seemed to rise from the very bones of the earth. It was a sound of immense pressure and profound failure, a noise that preceded thought and defied immediate comprehension. For a fleeting second, the city held its breath. Then, with a deafening roar that ripped through the unseasonably warm air of January 15, 1919, the world turned brown and sweet and utterly deadly. It was just after 12:30 in the afternoon, a time when the waterfront district was bustling with life. Laborers were taking their lunch break, children were darting through the narrow cobblestone streets, and the clatter of horse-drawn wagons mingled with the screech of the elevated train on Commercial Street. Dominating this landscape of crowded brick tenements and bustling warehouses was a monstrous steel cylinder, 50 feet high and 90 feet in diameter, painted a dreary brown to mask the weeping, sticky streaks that constantly marred its surface. This was the property of the Purity Distilling Company, and inside it sloshed 2.3 million gallons of crude molasses. Witnesses later struggled to describe the moment of rupture. Some heard a sound like a thunderclap, others a deep growl, and many recalled a sharp metallic shrieking, the sound of rivets, hundreds of them, shooting out from the tank's seams like machine gun fire. Isaac Yetton, a freight hauler, was loading his wagon when he heard the snap. He looked up to see the massive tank seem to peel apart, and then a dark, churning wall of liquid, estimated to be anywhere from 15 to 40 feet high, erupted outwards. The wave did not move like water. It was a dense, viscous tsunami, weighing approximately 13,000 tons, and it surged through the streets at an astonishing 35 miles per hour. The sheer physics of it was terrifying. For the first minute, the molasses behaved like a solid wall of force, its immense weight and density obliterating everything in its path. It slammed into the Engine 31 firehouse, shoving the entire brick building off its foundation. It smashed into the columns supporting the elevated railway, the immense steel girders twisting and groaning as if they were made of soft lead. A train car was lifted from its tracks and hurled aside. Buildings weren't just flooded, they were pulverized. A truck was lifted and tossed into Boston Harbor. Then, as the wave lost its initial momentum, its nature changed. The molasses began to cool and thicken rapidly, transforming from a high-velocity battering ram into a suffocating, inescapable mire. It became a gelatinous trap, 2 to 3 feet deep, that clung to everything it touched. The scene was apocalyptic. Molasses, waist-deep, covered the street and swirled and bubbled about the wreckage. Here and there struggled a form. Whether it was animal or human being was impossible to tell. Only an upheaval, a thrashing about in the sticky mass, showed where any life was. Horses, tethered to their wagons, met a gruesome end. They became ensnared in the goo, and the more they panicked and struggled, the deeper they sank into the sticky trap, dying like flies on flypaper. Humans suffered the same fate. Those not killed by the initial impact found themselves caught in a slow, sweet, and suffocating death. The thick liquid clogged their airways, and its immense weight pinned them down under debris. In the heart of the North End, a vibrant, densely populated neighborhood home to thousands of working-class immigrant families, the disaster struck with intimate cruelty. 10-year-old Pasquale Iantosca and his friend Maria Di Stasio had been out playing, likely collecting fallen shards of molasses from the perpetually leaking tank to make candy, a common pastime for local children. When the tank burst,
The wave caught them. Both children would be counted among the dead. Inside the firehouse, firefighter George Leahy was trapped in the wreckage and drowned in the thick, rising fluid. The first rescuers on the scene were 116 cadets from the USS Nantucket, a training ship docked nearby. They ran into the knee-deep muck, pulling survivors from the wreckage. They were soon joined by Boston police and Red Cross nurses, but the rescue was a nightmare. The molasses was so slick and sticky that rescuers could barely keep their footing. It was impossible to tell the living from the dead. Victims were so coated in the brown syrup they were unrecognizable. The search for victims would last for 4 agonizing days. In the end, the Great Boston Molasses Flood claimed 21 lives and injured 150 more. The tank had been a blight on the North End since its hasty construction in 1915. It was a monument to rushed engineering and corporate avarice. Molasses was a boom commodity, essential for producing industrial ethanol used in munitions for World War I. With prohibition looming, the United States Industrial Alcohol Company, USIA, was racing to produce as much alcohol as possible, making every gallon of molasses precious. The man overseeing the tank's construction, Arthur Gell, was the company's treasurer, not an engineer. Basic safety tests were ignored. From the moment it was first filled, the tank leaked so profoundly that the company's only solution was to paint it brown to hide the constant weeping streams of syrup. Local residents would fill cans with the leaking molasses for their own use. The tank groaned and rumbled every time new warm molasses was pumped in. Employees warned management that it was structurally unsound, but their concerns were dismissed. The final, fatal ingredient was the weather. The day of the disaster was unseasonably warm, likely causing the molasses inside to ferment and expand, increasing the pressure against the already overstressed steel walls. In the aftermath, USIA wasted no time in crafting a narrative to absolve itself from blame. The company claimed the tank had been blown up by saboteurs, anarchists, playing on the post-war Red Scare that gripped the nation. But the residents of the North End and the families of the victims knew the truth. They had lived with the leaking, groaning menace for years. In a groundbreaking legal move, 119 plaintiffs banded together to file one of the first class action lawsuits in Massachusetts history against USIA. The resulting legal battle was epic, lasting 6 years. The court appointed a neutral auditor, Colonel Hugh W. Ogden, to determine the cause. The plaintiff's legal team presented damning evidence of the tank's structural flaws. Engineering experts concluded that the steel plates were too thin. The steel itself was brittle, and the rivets were weak. The conclusion was blunt. The tank was improperly designed, and its failure was due entirely to structural weakness. On April 28, 1925, Colonel Hugh Ogden issued his ruling. He found USIA wholly responsible. There was no bomb. The tank had been poorly constructed and maintained, and the company was guilty of negligence. USIA was ordered to pay the equivalent of over $11 million today to the victims and their families. It was a landmark victory, holding a powerful corporation accountable and giving a voice to a marginalized immigrant community. The cleanup of Boston's North End took months. For decades afterward, residents swore that on hot summer days, a faint, sweet smell of molasses still rose from the cobblestones, a ghostly reminder of the disaster. The tragedy led directly to the passage of laws across the United States requiring professional engineers to review construction plans and mandating building permits and inspections. The Great Molasses Flood, a bizarre and terrible chapter in American history, became a quiet catalyst that helped usher in an era of modern industrial regulation, making the world a safer place.